Sunset Shimmer, the beginning of Harmony, back in the days Good Morning Baltimore, and a couple of projects I don't like to talk about because they're the bad examples of things going wrong.
Well, I'm Vinson Visions. I have done quite a few different animations all across the past 7 or 8 years. I've been on several panels with Minty Root here ever since HarmonyCon 2018. I was on HarmonyCon 2019's last big panel. I've been around.
I am Saphire of Valiant, and I head the Valiant Studios Dimensional Shift project, which is a really ambitious video game project. And I also work with all of these guys as a sound designer too.
I'm Silver Screen. I'm not personally an animator, but I am the writer and director of the Wasteland Productions Fallout Equestria animated series that we are trying to get up and running. So I have some experience in gathering a team of people and working with them to create a project on that scale.
I'm Pearmare Animations. I used to do Source Filmmaker animations back in the day, but recently I've moved on to Toon Boom animation. My most popular stuff recently have been the Fallout Equestria animation Anti-Up and a few other various animations I like to work on.
All right, so this panel is a little bit unplanned. We don't have a slideshow for you. We do have some stuff that I believe Minty will want to show at some point. You just let me know when you want to do that.
I got the computer, so...
But let's start with this first. Why do you even want to make your project?
Is it for fame? Is it for love? It's a general, really good question to ask yourself. Because these types of projects involve a lot of mental energy, it requires a lot of dedication. There has to be some obviously underlying reason for that.
And YouTube is not going to help you with that.
Oh no. Unless you upload frequently, you post something that just happens to be trendy, YouTube's algorithm is not your friend. Unless you just like cranking out YouTube shorts every week. Which I tried to do that for a bit. I can't. Animation just isn't that way for me. It's a hobby, not a medium to make money, really.
Yes, it's worth noting that this is an art, and contrary to what it seems like is out there online, because you know we get curated feeds of everyone's success and not their failures. Art has been like this for hundreds of years. You're never going to see many artists in the past that were actually successful from a business standpoint in their time. So you really can't do this to be popular or to make money or stuff like this. You gotta do it because you love it. And so once you really get your why down, your why do you want to do this, then it really will help you out with how to go about and how to start the project.
Yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to the money-making method of if you want to make a living off of doing animations, especially when it comes to this fandom, making fan animations off of My Little Pony, it's hard to make money off of someone else's trademarked, copyrighted material. And we could get into the whole discussion of trademark and stuff, but it's really, we don't want to get too in the weeds with that. But yeah, as a hobby, as a method of expression, of telling whatever story or emotions you feel like you need to get out and express, whether you are a beginner animator, you don't know even really how to animate, or whether you're a veteran animator and you're really, whatever experience level you are, it just depends on that passion to create.
So,
I'm gonna say, one thing that you can use to say you can't get in, you don't want to get in because of money, like they're saying, and all this other stuff like fame and stuff. One thing that's really good to get into doing big projects about is this fandom is extremely. It's just there's something magical about making a product for this fandom and the way that the fandom gives feedback to your projects, it really just makes the project that you're making that much better. Just knowing that you're contributing to a fandom like this, it just makes you feel that much more involved in the whole community as a whole.
Yes.
Collaboration is your friend,
Yes.
which
it
we
is.
will get into.
So, what do y'all think, audience interaction time, what do y'all think is one of the first things you should do to start a big project? Anyone?
You have to begin with the end in mind, know what you want as your end goal, because otherwise then you'll have no direction.
That's a good start.
Yes.
I was gonna say draw a plan.
There you go, we're getting warmer.
Planning is a good one, too.
Talk to somebody who's done something similar.
That's
Yes.
a good idea. Talk to someone who's
Always
done something
advice.
similar.
Or plan out the whole thing from a outline standpoint, like a storyboard, then beginning from beginning to end.
Yes.
Or Bibles are also your friend.
And write it down.
Yes.
Be aware of the workload necessary to complete the project.
Yes,
Yes.
that is all part of scope planning. Very
Yes,
important.
and that is where write it down comes in, and it's the thing I suck at, just saying. Writing it down, and this doesn't mean you have to write down a script or whatever, but writing it down can help get those thoughts out of your head into the real world so that you can look at them and process them aside from your glorified vision in your head, right? Because the vision in your head is never, ever going to be what it's actually going to turn out. And once you start really putting that onto paper and seeing how it doesn't really translate and actually forcing your brain to process what the specifics are, then you can start to realize, okay, how big is the scope? What all is going to have to go into this? Am I going to have other people come on? And that's where you start to do the planning and the outlining and whatnot. And so just writing it down and getting it into the physical realm and outside of your head is honestly, in my opinion, one of the best places to start.
And that way you don't get afraid of losing any ideas that crop up.
That too.
And we live in a day and age where you can dictate things that you want to write. Yeah.
Yes, Ishi?
I was gonna say more importantly, sometimes if you're a writer, you might end up waking up so early in your sleep because sometimes your brain keeps giving you ideas like, hey, write this, write that. And sometimes you gotta wake up as quick as you can to write them down before you forget.
Yes.
Get a notepad on your phone or take notes what you do.
I literally set weeks to myself. So I will go for like 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 months in which I have no clue what's gonna happen. I do no word. And then sometimes I'll be in a place like, I was in Washington DC in November, and I was in the Capitol building as a touring. And I literally went marble floors to Candlelight Castle, and I literally started dictating into my Twitter, into myself, like the hooves were clattering up the marble steps because I was in that kind of environment.
Yes, and that's very good to do. Having that ability to write down those notes wherever you are, because look, let's be honest. If we're all creatives here, we know how it is. You never actually get ideas when you want them. You get them right in the middle of doing something else, and especially right when you want to go to bed.
Yep.
Or at work.
Yep.
Or at work. Yes.
Work, in the middle of ordering food, it can pretty much happen
Finding
anywhere.
somewhere.
Yeah, that too.
I have a really good example that I think that I can share that can clue you into like the process of like starting an ambitious project. I started a Fallout Equestria animation series from the ground up, which can seem really daunting at first. You're like, where do you even start? When I started with that, what I did was I just wrote a script. I just adapted the first chapter of the story, just created a script of the story of what I wanted to look like. And then I basically just started like going to every Fallout Equestria like community, like Discord server, like everywhere, and just being like, hey, I'm trying to start this project. If you're interested, here's the script, here's my idea for the animation and stuff. And so if you create a script beforehand, some stuff to prove to people your idea that you have in mind. Maybe you're not very writer focused, maybe you're more visual and you create a storyboard, some concepts to share with people. That is a very important aspect of pre-production, is that getting those core ideas of your project so that you can get people on board with your vision.
Yes, and that actually ties into something I don't know if we'll talk about later. I'm looking at the script here, and it doesn't seem to be on there. But you have to be very, very careful that you don't waste time. See, that is a good thing to do right there, is actually writing something you're going to use. But what we can be tempted to do is make like a passion trailer for our little animation or something like that to get people excited and whatnot. What does that do for you though? Yes, it can get attention for your project, but most of the time though, it sets up false expectations. It puts expectations on yourself. It starts to make people think that you're going to release the project soon, so it puts a lot of extra pressure on yourself. And it also makes people think that you got it all together, which you don't. So it's important that, in my philosophy, especially for the video game, because, oh man, so many Brody video games have just gone out there and said that they're going to do all this cool stuff. They've even shown gameplay, but that gameplay was just fancy graphics and absolutely no good mechanics and just garbage underneath. And they spun around it for 7 years and didn't do anything because they were just sitting there. Well, they didn't have a plan, really. So we are not going to release any type of trailer or anything like that or any type of substantial trailer until we actually have put in the effort to make what we're showing in the trailer.
Yeah, and that's something I've had to learn over time too, is wait until you actually have presentable material and have a plan. Because you don't want to give your audience false expectations.
So, what should go into that plan?
Who is that a question for?
Was that for me? Yes. Talking about like pre-production, like what sort of things you should plan so that you can set yourself up for success.
Well, what is pre-production first?
Yeah. So pre-production is basically planning out pretty much every aspect of your production. It is a lot of thinking ahead of what you want that final result to be, right? And then not only creating like a core concept of what you want your project to look like, but also steps, goals, and deadlines that you know that you can reach and hit, and that you know that you can do, like steps that you can take to reach that end goal. One of the things that I talked about at the at our fan animation panel was the concept of a production schedule, which sounds really boring and kind of complicated to create, but it's really like a roadmap of your production. You can plan out things like storyboard, animation, and then it moves on to sound effects, music, and then a final mix, you know? And maybe there are more or less things in your particular production. Every production is different, so you can customize it to yours. But then you'll also create deadlines for each of those things, when you want to have those things finished. And that can give you literally a roadmap of your production, so that during the middle of your production, if you're not really sure where to go, if you're like lost in the weeds, you can look back at that production schedule and be like, okay, this is where I'm at and this is where I need to go. And that can give you a sense of motivation and direction to trudge forward and keep going through that production. And that's all stuff that you can do and plan out right at the beginning of your project.
One thing I would like to show, because a lot of people talk about, for example, animatics, and when they hear about animatic on YouTube, they see a lot of very well-drawn, mostly just motion comics that they have that are based on music. Mostly sometimes it's just that they don't have the animation skills, that they just want to have something with visuals that convey the feels that they want. I'd like to show a bit production animatic that we had for Missing Out, and I'd like to put emphasis on some aspects of it. Let's see, there we go, this side. Let's put this full screen, and I don't have sound for that, so...
Use your imagination.
Yep. Well, we didn't have the final music either. So
If you want, we could dub over it. Rolled one. I think she's been there a lot lately. Maybe you should go check and see if she's all right.
this part here, this was a test run for the projector effect to make sure that it would actually work. I remember doing that during the holidays on my crappy laptop, and I knew if my crappy laptop would render it, I'd be fine.
3D.
Yep. And it's perfectly fine to make something that looks janky as hell. Nobody besides you will actually watch it. Will actually watch the final animation because it
Start, Brett.
That skipped an entire line.
Should be text to speech.
boom. And for example, you can see here that line was taken out during the production because I realized that it didn't fit the flow of the story. It just didn't cut well with the next shot. You'll notice, for example, some of the poses here. It's basically just me tracing over a vector I found on Google. It's fine. It's not like tracing for art that you're going to show at the end. It really conveys what the shot should be like, and during all those shots I could see, for example, all the angles I would need to focus. For example, if I wanted to have a clear cut between the sky and the backgrounds, I could have a good idea of what side of the background to put all the details on. We had, for example, the balcony. I needed to have basically this side of the balcony to be working fine. I had this side, didn't have to worry about the right side at all because we wouldn't see it. We had a cube for Spike to prop himself on, and I realized while working on it that I could just replace it by something else while later that would just have the same height. I ended up just finding a chest, just modeling a chest with Celestia's cutie mark on it that would work well. I also realized while working on it that I only needed the part of balcony, so because I have the wide shot of the crystal tree, and you see only a proxy version of that very low res version of the balcony, and we just switched to a simpler set with just the balcony and none of the rest, so I didn't have to worry about trying to model it in more details. So just having the animatic to know which part to focus on and not focus on tiny details that would just be cut out of the camera. It also really helps because if I start to work with details that are out of the camera and I realize I want to show them, I might end up with some shots that are too wide, that just don't fit at all, that don't convey the character animation at all, that don't convey the story because I just want to show stuff. It's definitely not the approach I recommend people to do, to just try to just show your model from all angles just for. So
yeah, and that's where the planning really comes in, because when you have a plan, you know what you're going to do. So you don't have to model the entire crystal castle. You can only model a part of it that you're going to see. And the animatic, the entire purpose of the animatic is to establish all the shots and what it's going to look like. You know, if you go look at the animatics for the My Little Pony series, you'll see that they did the exact same thing. And they only really communicated what they needed to show there. And if you've ever actually looked at the leaked Flash files, which is illegal, don't do that, you would see that they're outside of shots that like have a big pan that show like an entire town. There's literally nothing outside of it. And because why would you do that? Why would you make extra stuff if you're not going to show that, right? And in the gaming world or the game design world, we call that the levels of detail or LODs, and knowing where your camera is, especially where the player is going to be, and Vinson figured this out. You could easily, if you want to show a forest outside of a window, why are you going to sit there and model 1,000 trees or try and import 1,000 trees to make a realistic looking forest? You can literally put 2D pictures and cutouts of trees. It's extremely simple.
And you can cheat with films because it's a very linear sequence, unlike games where, in games you still can cheat. I work in video games professionally, but in films you can cheat even more because you have control of the camera. So yeah, if you caught the fan animation panel yesterday, Pearmare will tell you if he can avoid animating legs, he will. No one's going to know that except for him.
Yes.
And I use that trick too in my animations a lot of times. If you do a lot of headshots, you don't technically need to animate the body too much. You might have to a little bit, but there are just certain areas that you don't have to worry about. And animation uses these tricks all the time, because most professional projects do have a time limit.
For example, here, if you look, there's only 3 types of trees, and that's it, and like 5 types of houses. Just because they're at different angles, you don't notice the repetition. So, because I realized, it's not worth it to try to make more models that people won't notice. They are supposed to look at the middle of the screen, not here. So.
It's okay to cut corners if you're showing a circle.
Yes, it's okay to cut corners if you're showing a circle.
I was going to say, with the software that involved, have you guys ever experienced, like for big projects, just saw your stuff get erased in time even when you were editing it?
Yeah, that's why you hover your hand over Control S all the time, and you hit it every single time you make a change.
And you make copies
on different hard drives, cloud storage in case your house goes on fire, and
Yep.
And that feeling that you get when you lose a bunch of effort and time that you worked on something, that is the same feeling that a lot of people get when the work that they put into something ends up ultimately not being used in the final product, because maybe it gets cut or maybe it gets changed. Now all this work and effort gets cut out. So that's why planning everything in ahead of time is so incredibly important, especially if you're working with other people or even yourself. If you end up having to change something halfway through, or because you didn't plan for it or because you planned poorly for it, then it can be a huge demotivator, especially for yourself, to continue working on the project.
Well, not only that, but it can also lead to something called the sunken cost fallacy, where you have put so much effort and time into this thing, but it doesn't work. It will never work, but you don't want to remove it because you put so much time and effort into it, and it would be a waste to remove it. But you can't use it for your project, or it ruins your entire project, so you just give up. And that's actually what Ambient White did. I don't know if y'all know what Ambient White is, the video game.
I've seen that project took so long to do, but it basically failed.
They, like I said, they spun around in circles for 7 years, just making random stuff and not actually planning anything. And then they realized, oh, oops, our game is garbage. But we spent so much time on it, and we don't want to go back and fix it. So we'll just do that later.
Yeah, and something to mention is that, yes, reworks are sometimes done professionally. Minty, I know you had to suffer through that. I have too. I worked on a project for months where my art didn't appear in the final game, and that's very demotivating. And that yes, that can happen professionally, but if we go back to our first point of like, are you doing this because you enjoy it? You don't have to have those standards. You can just, if you plan it right, you don't have to worry about redos. And it's not completely avoidable. Like, during this story process, Saph will tell you, like, sometimes you do have to adapt your script, because writing is oftentimes organic. And sometimes it may be for the betterment of the project. But as long as that's done in pre-production, which in the pre-production phase you really don't do a lot of heavy asset creation, whether it be models or characters. If you take care of all that stuff in pre-production, you don't have to worry much about the sunk cost fallacy. That's just modifying your scripts, your pages, documentation.
Yes, sir.
There's actually a lot of really good stories in the animation industry that they can completely polish scenes only for an executive just to cut off. I think in Atlantis business, they had this scene where there's the Norwegians fighting over the Shepherd's Journal. It's fully animated, fully polished, but they said, no, it makes the movie too long, get rid of it.
Yeah.
And that's, also the story of just redoing the movie, which is, of course, how what's called Something of the Sun became Emperor's New Groove.
Yes. So, pre-production is nice. I think y'all understand that pretty well. Yes?
I spent 6 years in pre-production for my project, so.
There you go. And actually, for the record, please do not be afraid to spend a long time in pre-production. Dimensional Shift from Valiant Studios has been in pre-production for what, 3 years now? We thought that we were finished a year ago and decided no, we weren't. And we were going to continue on because we would rather make sure we have a good game and a good product instead of a bad game that ends up being released quickly.
Yes, and if any of you follow my channel, The Fleeting Light, that's been in different phases ever since 2018. And that's because we've had to do several scope changes just because the idea of a project is just so big. Of we have to go back and rework stuff. And yes, we're still spending a long time in pre-production, but once I'm more confident with a solidified plan, it'll make things going forward a whole lot more easier. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about writing, but we really want the time to make sure that our writing is solidified. I think we're past the point where it's more than just the visuals. A lot of people in this fandom can make really good looking animations, but it's whether how you feel about the Marvel movies, which are very visually phenomenal. Yeah, some of them story-wise are not great, right? And what do you remember when you come out of a theater? It's I think some people just go for popcorn flicks, yes. But what makes great Marvel movies is the writing. And so for me specifically, it's the heavy emphasis on we want the writing to be exceptional. Yes, that might mean things will take longer, but once it's out for the rest of time.
Yes, and writing is the most important part of your project. I don't care if you're not a writer, it is still the most important part of your project because, like Vincent said, we can do good animations in the fandom. There's so many people who can do good animations in the fandom. But if the writing is bad, you're not going to be engaged. Yes, you're going to be like, oh yeah, those are some pretty interesting visuals and whatnot, but it's not going to move you, it's not going to touch you, and it's not going to tell a story. Why do most people play video games from 30 years ago that are visually very unappealing? Because they play well, their gameplay is fun, or their writing is good. Why do people still watch movies like The Matrix? Because its writing is good. I know, I see you right there.
And that's why people love concepts like Star Wars, like
Star Wars.
1977. Yeah, the effects were limited for the time, but you know what Star Wars did? It revolutionized the film industry.
Yes, it did.
After Star Wars, the movies were not the same, and it's because George Lucas had created such a unique idea that was not known at the time. Yes, the visual effects were groundbreaking in their own right, but it was in combination with the story is what really sold it.
Yeah.
I could say the same thing about Star Trek, one of my favorite franchises. A lot of great writing in that episodes that fans still talk about 20 or 30 or 50 plus years later. And you could say the same thing about the new Star Trek shows, which have been a mixed bag. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad. But every time that I talk about or watch podcasts about fellow Trekkies, we talk about is it going to be a story that we're going to remember in 20 years? We don't talk about the CGI was great or the visual effects. It's is the episode good? And you really have to especially consider that in today's market where 20 plus episode seasons are no longer the norm. It's 10 to 13 episodes. So you really want to make sure that your writing sticks in that. And then, you know, what, like I said, what are you going to remember? You're going to remember the memorable episodes. I think there are plenty of Star Trek The Next Generation episodes that are remembered because they had such unique ideas in them. And that's just an example of a lot of different things. Like, we all like MLP, obviously. We wouldn't be here if that weren't the case. We still remember the show, even though it ended 3 years ago, because we love the characters and we love the writing. It's been successful because it was executed well. And the writing was a huge part of that. Huge part.
It had so much going against it. And yet, despite all of that, we're here now because of the strength of the show. We all see the strength of the show. And that is due to great writing and great pre-production.
Yes. I don't know if y'all have read the series Bible for My Little Pony. You should. It's over on the Internet Archive. Lauren really knew what she was doing. And I kind of feel bad talking about this because I did look at the leaks at one point. But they even planned out what the music is going to sound like. They didn't just say, oh, I want it to sound like children's music. No, they actually had detailed plans of how both the play-like soundtracks, the songs were going to sound like, but also the backing track of the entire show. They really focused on how that impacts people and what mood it gives. So that's just really how important that is because we see the results of good planning.
Oh, but no, I'm just thinking, I'm sounding ahead, but yesterday when you were doing your presentation on sound, one example of that I really love and that just sets the mood so perfectly for me in My Little Pony is that sound, the shivering sound when their magical corona comes on. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That sound is so specific, and I instantly know I'm in My Little Pony whenever I hear it.
And you know what about the magic sounds? They actually planned that out too. I had a friend of mine who emailed the sound designers from them asking if they could get some of the magic sounds. You can't. But they actually specifically went through several variations. They didn't want it to sound super sparkly and fairy-like, but they also didn't want it to sound super sci-fi. So they really had to find a nice in-between and really made a, honestly, very unique magic sound.
With that and stuff, the sound design of the show also changed over the years too with the magic. Like the whooshes and all the ambient noises that they used, even during the first season, they had to change over time.
Yes, the sounds changed over time. I will note, I believe, I think it was like in one of those Brony interview things. I remember them saying that they, even though they didn't have the budget for it, they wanted to approach that. They wanted to approach the show as if it was a massive, popular Broadway show. They wanted to put all that effort into it, even though they didn't get paid for it, right? That shows that they really cared about it and that their heart was in the right place.
If I recall right, at the gala, they had a group of volunteers to do the backing vocals, and it just adds so much more, just having just other voices.
Like at the gala and stuff, that song at the gala?
Yeah.
So I think we've talked a lot about pre-production, about how to start your project and how to set yourself up for success, but do we want to talk a little bit about like collaborating with people, getting people on board, or just like carrying through on the stuff that you planned? Sort of stuff like that?
Well, if you're...
Press the button and no, it's on the side. Like
Well, if you're super shy and socially anxious like me, if you make a project and it turns out okay, someone might message you and give you advice and maybe help you in future projects. So if people message you or just keep your doors open in case someone comes along that knows things more than you do.
Right, that's something we talked about when we were at lunch. Don't think you can do it yourself. You can't. Don't fool yourself. You cannot do everything. All right? I thought I could. I can't.
Yeah, and for a time I did that too. But when my ideas got more ambitious, I quickly realized of like how easy burnout can be. Because there were so many aspects of things that go into production, even when I do source filmmaker animations.
The idea that no one else is going to do it exactly like you're going to do it, and thus there's no point, you just do it all yourself, is, well, what we call in therapy is a cognitive distortion. But it's a lie. It's not true. You can communicate well enough for that. And in fact, you may find out, which I very much found out, that by communicating those ideas to other people, they're going to have very unique perspectives that will actually help better your project rather than hinder it. But if they do talk about stuff that hinders it, just be assertive and say, no, I don't want it that way. This is how I plan it to go. And you direct that flow of that team, which this guy can talk about.
Yeah, I can talk a lot about on that. Like I said, I'm not an artist or an animator myself. I'm more of a writer, and so when I set out to make an animated series, obviously I'm going to need a bunch of artists and animators on my team. If you've planned well enough for what you want your project to look like, then you should have a good idea of what you want that to look like. But no matter how thorough your pre-production documents are, other people reading them may get a different idea of what it's supposed to be. And so communicating your ideas, providing people with steps, with like tasks that they can work on, like they said, delegating things to other people so that you're not doing it all yourself. Going in with the idea that, they can't read your mind, your teammates, the people who want to help create your project. And so you have to help them to see what your vision as a director, as the person who's creating this project, what that is, and then help them to create what it is, what you want that end result to look like.
And it's also important because you say that your teammates cannot read your mind, your viewers cannot read your mind either. So if you have a vision that is very specific, that you don't communicate with your teammates, your audience is not going to understand your ideas either if you're very, very specific and very eccentric.
Yeah, and that's why visual storytelling is very important.
Yes, visual storytelling is very important.
Yeah, and when we talk about collaboration too, you may think to yourself, well, I make my animations myself, I probably won't be working with other animators, but we're also talking about voice actors, sound designers, musicians, other people who can help you with those aspects of the project are people who you're going to be collaborating with on that project, and so you want to be able to work with them to help them so that they can help you realize your vision.
And on the topic of voice actors, one thing that I did learn the hard way when it comes to talking with voice actors to get the line delivery, it's something you really need to do hands-on. You cannot just send lines via email, just read them and that's it. You need to be to get yourself in a call to actually talk about the direction, to explain yourself what's the intention, not just what's going to be on the screen, but also the subtext. Really, what you want the character to think in their head. It's also really helpful because you don't need so much back and forth with your ideas, and also it's more human because you realize that your voice actors are people, and you socialize with.
I was going to say with that too, you also have to have a voice director to be part of that for voice acting. That's why the main director is just the main director of the project, and then you have to have other people that are part of the cast that have to work out and stuff.
Well, yes, I mean, you don't have to have a voice director if you know how to direct their voices. But if you don't know how to do that, it's completely fine to delegate. I was thinking about what he was saying. I remember when I was working on Ambient White, when I was working on Ambient White, Dreamy Wings would send lines to I'm Shadow 007, and she'd say, okay, I can record them on Thursday, and then she records like several takes of them, sends them back, and then he's like, oh, well, no, I want it to sound like this and this, and he put it all in text, and then would send it back to her, and of course, she would have to wait another week to do that. And imagine doing that like 3 or 4 times. That's ridiculous. Just get into a call and do it in an hour. And I remember I was recording for Aurora for the update video we released on the Valiant Studios channel. I just had her record all the lines right there. Unfortunately, she wasn't recording, but she remembered how to say them.
And even if you can't do a live session, one of the things I like to do with Iron Shadow, because she works with me, is we can do line reading. In other words, she can record on her iPhone or limited software, and we can go through the whole scripts and say, all right, we're going to go through the takes, and then she can listen to them later and give me actual takes that are pretty much exactly the same, just on a better microphone, which is also another good alternative. It's better than text takes, which is what we just talked about.
Also, another thing is if you have scenes of dialogue, you might not be able to get 2 voice actors to be together to record like they would in the show, because they have their own schedules. But what you can do is you can be the one responding, at least as a temp. What we had for the False Sunset Shimmer was talking with Webcake, and I would deliver Celestia's line as a response, so you should get much more genuine reactions. It would really feel like we would be in an argument, so we could actually edit with the right timing. Taking one of the worst examples in the fandom in terms of reaction time, Dusk's Dawn. You have incredibly long pauses between the lines, and part of it is the editing, but the other part is just the fact that they recorded their own, just line by line by line, just the lines that they had. So
I may also suggest maybe also even if you can't do calls, you can also probably send a recording session of yourself, just giving directions.
Yes, you can also record yourself doing the lines.
Saying okay, here's what you gotta do. Then you start acting out the personality for them. That way they can replicate that.
Or you can send them examples of takes from other movies or shows as reference.
Yes,
which also helps.
And just on that note, before we move on to the next topic, because I think y'all understand that pretty well, and this goes for everyone, not just voice actors or actors, don't be afraid to tell them to do it again. I mean, obviously be gracious about it, be nice, but don't be afraid to push it to get what you want. I'm honestly, I was a little bit, first time I was with Shadow, I was a little bit nervous, and I did kind of let her slide on several parts I thought were just Thankfully they worked out for the better, but don't be afraid to do that, because it's not a burden on them. If anything, it's going to make your project better. Why make your project worse just because you want to be nice? I mean, think about the ramifications down the line. What if they think that, oh, well, my voice acting really just was really stale in that part. I kind of wish they had directed me better for that. Now I can't use that in my portfolio, right?
Yep, and Revenge of the Sith is a great example of that. I think there are a lot of good actors in that, but I think what failed in that regards was the direction that they got. I think if they had been better directed, we could have gotten better performances out of that. I'll say, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say too, just like you just said, Revenge of the Sith. I was thinking that line from the ending where Anakin and Obi-Wan, I have the high ground, and that entire scene was just the most awkward.
You underestimate my powers.
Don't try it.
I have done some like just voice acting or just project stuff, and the method I use is just I have the line, I do it 3 different takes, and they can say, all right, I liked it, the first take, or I like the second take, or I like the third take, and then say, I need more. Stuff like that is encouraging.
But yeah, taking multiple takes as well. I think if you talk to people like Shadow or Fox or some other fandom actresses, you'll notice that when you're in a live session with them, they'll sit there and they'll take multiple tries at the line until you stop them and you're like, oh, that's good, So most of them will do that kind of automatically. But moving on to the next topic, though, discipline and motivation. Discipline and motivation. Motivation alone will not carry you to the finish line. I think all of you know that. It is a fickle thing. And man, after that first session of just vomiting out all your ideas, you get tired. And you don't want to do it anymore.
Don't legitimately vomit the whole thing. That'd be no context to that.
No, you don't legitimately vomit the whole thing. How's that going to work?
I don't know.
It's called brainstorming.
Yeah, it's a brainstorming, but that discipline of I'm going to work on it a little bit today. I'm going to do a little bit today. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to work on something. If there's something that's hard, that's like keeping you back, go work on something else. There are multiple facets to a project and not just the one thing you're doing now. For example, Dimensional Shift right now is in a little bit of a bind because Aruzal, our one programmer, is suffering with some burnout, and it's also at the phase where he is just putting in all the mechanics before we start making alphas to release to the public. Well, what do? Just sit on our butts and do nothing? No. We actually have a little character over there that needs to be redesigned, otherwise we're going to get C&D. So we're going to work on that, and that's what we've been doing, as well as working on some writing things and other stuff here and there. There's always something to do in a big project, and I think you can talk about that pretty well, Minty. Or you
for example, when I was working on Missing Out, one of the issues that we had was that some of the lines were just not there. One of the things I would try to do whenever I had free time is to just scrub over the timeline, just check the shots that are not started, see if there's anything that has that doesn't have a line that for example, that doesn't require a line that is not there, or that doesn't require an element that is not figured out yet. For example, it could be making crowd characters, just refining the backgrounds, just tweaking the editing, vectoring some assets, compositing a shot just for trying a vertical slice. Actually, I guess I could talk about vertical slice now.
Yes, you can talk vertical and horizontal slice.
So they call it vertical slice. Basically, the idea when you start a shot, you start animating the characters, you refine just doing key poses, you do the actual animation, you then refinement, render, and then again you have the layout of the background, you have the render of that, compositing. And compositing is a lot of steps. You have shading, you have to worry about tracking if you have tracking. It's a lot of steps that usually you don't want to do all the different steps in a row because they require different skill sets and getting really draining. And you might have to figure out some stuff. For example, if you do a full project, you might want to only do your key poses for all the shots for all the project. So you have a rough idea of the amount of time it took, so you know how much time to put on all of that. It's the idea of an horizontal slice. You just do one step for everything all at once instead of just doing basically a recipe for just one shot. And the vertical slice, the opposite, is really that you complete everything on a shot to get it complete, pristine, just perfect rendering. You can use the vertical slice, for example, if you want to just check if the recipe is right. For example, if you want to figure out the technique for shading the characters properly, I would compare it, for example, if you had a massive piece of art where you would do the line art, the shading, all the coloring, the shading, for just one small piece of it, just know what it would look like with all the steps, and then you can just apply all of them all at once.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to do that, like with that shot there, or with say Dimensional Shift. We really needed to figure out how are we going to put nice high quality ponies in there that don't blow out your computer's resources, right? So we actually took the time to model, rig, and animate a pony and put it in there. We're not modeling, rigging, and animating all of the ponies now, but that allows us, the vertical slice allows you to see how difficult is this, what are some issues that I'm going to come across, also like the projector scene for the tree. That is a really weird shot, and you got to figure out, can you actually do that? So that's something that you want to model it, complete it, do it all right there, and see if you can do it then. But you don't want to do that for the entire production, because then that's just burning yourself out on every shot, and it's going to be inconsistent as you end up learning how to do things better and better and better as you go along.
Yes, and sometimes the first go while it is the hardest, it oftentimes is a good learning experience. Like my friend Mario Travel 209, which helped me revamp our main character's rig, spent days doing that, a brand new rig. And he even told me, yeah, it was a pain, but now that I've done it once, all the other rigs that I will make will be faster. So oftentimes, if you can get past that first hurdle, everything will make a little bit more sense, and it'll become easier as time goes on.
And it also provides a look target, something that is complete that you can use as a reference to have a good idea of what the other shots could look like, so you have a very more consistent look. So for example, this one, all the colors, the rough idea of the exposure level, the sharpness, the look of the clouds, all the filtering, I had a really good idea of what it would look like in final, and you could see later that it looked like that in final. So
yes, and that was consistent between all the shots. And also that planning, similar to storyboarding, of course, can make sure that everything actually ends up working out together. We talk about pre-production a lot and planning things beforehand, but in reality, it's never actually that cut and dry. You are going to change a lot of stuff in the middle of the production phase. The thing is that you're not changing big swaths of the project that's going to mess everything up. You're changing minor details here and there, like how this shot is or how that shot is, and that. And if you did a vertical slice for every single shot and completed it all the way through, I mean, you're just wasting a bunch of time and resources that you're not going to want to change later.
That's actually what happened with Project Thundercloud 2. I did that only in vertical slices because I didn't know any better, and I wasted so much time trying, because I had to go back to other shots to try to match them. It looked like garbage, so...
Yeah, and as far as the importance on changing what during production, it is much easier to repave a road than it is to plan an entirely new road. It's much easier to repave an existing road.
Yes, it is.
I want
It hates Pearmare today.
These mics don't like him. They just like
I want to know who here finished, they made and finished an entire project, and then they released it, and then it got no attention, no views, no anything, and that completely demotivated them from making another one.
I've been there.
I did an SFM project that took almost 9.5 months, almost 2,000 hours into non-stop SFM work. And that wasted 9 months of just doing all the little tweaking.
Yeah, I was literally just there because I also made a Source Filmmaker project, and I literally made most of the full Fallout Equestria Source Filmmaker animation, and then about halfway through, something happened, or it kept crashing on me, and it just frustrated me so much, I just gave up on Source Filmmaker altogether. So I was like, I'm just gonna go to Toon Boom. So stuff like that can happen. It's either push through it or find a way around it.
That's why there's always shortcuts.
Yes.
I hate my goldfish memory because I just thought of the next topic and I completely forgot.
I can talk about something else while I'm thinking about it.
Sure.
So one thing I would want to also make clear with animation: don't think of animation just as animation. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. One of the things I recommend is also look at other branches that are slightly animation adjacent. For example, looking at low-budget filmmaking. It's not something that you're gonna think of right away, and how it helps. I was thinking, for example, at Rebel Without a Crew, the documentary and filmmaking that was by Robert Rodriguez, who, he was behind movies like Spy Kids, a couple of episodes of The Mandalorian, or just one. I don't remember the number. He was making a documentary on how he made a movie for about $1,000, and he was showing some of the clever tricks he found just to pull it together. It was incredible. you don't think that it would help for animation that much because you can plan ahead your shots, but he found a lot of creative techniques that just helps your brain to just circle around. It also really helps, for example, for inspiration, because if you only think about animation, you're only going to do stories about princesses in Magic. So, for example, I was watching a documentary about scientific fraud that had nothing to do with animation, but it kept giving me some of the craziest ideas for one. And I was really grateful, like, just having clicked on it. So it's really important. You also checking, for example, the story of filmmaking. So you learn a bit how some of the things were learned along the way. Learning a bit about science if you want to do, want to create your own magic system. And it also really helps you to really see a more broad view of life, so you don't really hyper focus too much on animation in a way that ruins your life. So
I hate my goldfish memory. Okay. Right. Steal Like an Artist. You ever read that book? Anyone? You have one person. Anyone read the book Steal Like an Artist? What do you think that means?
That you should be free to copy ideas from other places as long as you're not, like infringing in their IP. You shouldn't feel too bad about it.
Plagiarizing.
Well, not plagiarizing.
Not plagiarizing. Plagiarizing is taking something that's not yours and making it and pretending that it's yours. Stealing like an artist, or borrowing ideas, is how our brains work all the time. There is no such thing as original thought. There's only a new way to combine thoughts that other people already had, which they combined other thoughts from, and so on and so forth. So if you're struggling with animation ideas or writing ideas or whatnot, go watch animations, go read fanfics, go watch movies. If you're struggling with sound design, go listen to stuff about sound design. If you're struggling with music, go listen to music. Inhale art that really resonates with you, and really is like, I really want that for my project. And even inhale stuff that you think you wouldn't want for your project, just so you can find unique ideas. And so that gives your brain a whole lot more creative juice and ammo to come up with stuff. Because, and it's funny you were talking about Star Trek. I grew up only watching Star Wars and Star Trek and The Matrix, and My Little Pony. And I went to write like a fanfic about my OC, and it was so obviously just like the combination of those four things, and it was really stupid and really bland, because that's all I had was just those things right there. I didn't have anything else outside of that. But now that I've been in these other creative projects and I've been doing all that, it's like my mind is brimming with ideas.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great tool as a creator if you're stuck, if you have like art block, creator block, you're not sure what to write about, what to animate. Go back and look at what inspires you to create. Watch the movies or shows that you like and that inspire you to create. And if you need to, just copy those ideas, like story ideas, elements, like exact shots and framing and things like that. Those aren't copyrighted. You can use those yourself. You can add them to your creator's toolbox, basically, to think about, to study the things that you love, figure out why they use those shots, and then to recreate those shots yourself. Not only is a great jumping off point to then be inspired from that, to then like have your own ideas and use those, but it's also a great way to learn about stuff like that, like literally adding it to your toolbox that you as a creator can then use to create stuff like that.
Yes, so it's not wrong to just copy someone else. Why? Well, because the difference between copying someone else and the colloquial way we think about it and this is that you're not doing it to try and like get some of the fame or attention that they're getting. You're doing it to learn why are they doing this? You're trying to get into their head and do what they're doing and then figure out how you can apply that to yourself, right? And that's one of my blessed little friends, Compute, is so paranoid about that. And I'm just like, no, just go copy it. I don't care if you literally trace over something. Do it. You'll learn how to not trace later. But at least now you're learning basic shapes and all this other stuff. And I mean, she's an artist, so she didn't have to do that. But I use that example because that's basically what you have to do. Is you start out by, I mean, even when we're kids, we start out by copying what our parents say. That's how we learn language.
Okay, 2 quick points here. So I'm actually an attorney in real life, real estate, not IP. But the general gist that I give people who I've been at a lot of times is the idea is, strictly speaking, is as long as your product is not, as long as somebody who wants to buy the other product doesn't buy your product by mistake, you're in the clear. So what I mean by that is Lisa Simpson, Hermione Granger, and Twilight Sparkle are 80% the same character. 80% the same character. It's just that they're in different settings and in different things happen to them. But the core character of Lisa Simpson, Hermione Granger, and at least the first few seasons of Twilight Sparkle are the same character. And it's fine, because no one who wants to buy The Simpsons buys Harry Potter instead. And nobody who wants to buy Harry Potter buys My Little Pony by mistake.
That's a very good way of thinking.
So you're in the, well, that's the legal way of thinking. That's how you're taught in law school. That's the difference. The second thing about how to steal ideas, you all work in Twilight Equestria. Let me tell you how we stole an idea from you guys in Twilight Equestria. So in my mega project, we needed a war because we needed it for 2 reasons. One, to put the main character through a major situation, and 2, to create a technological revolution like World War II style. The war involves zebras. Why does it involve zebras? Because we read Twilight Equestria.
I mean, steal like an artist. Yes, sir.
Like an artist, a little bit close to home. Bring a story through this.
That's very cute. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's adorable.
That is
so, the other thing that I want to talk about that is a little depressing and not as positive as that is, passion does not equal quality. Passion does not equal quality. And I'm just going to read what I typed here. Just because someone put a lot of work and effort into something doesn't make it good. We are tempted to give something a gold star because we feel like giving them a healthy critique is going to hurt their feelings. What truly hurts them is stunting them by not lovingly helping them improve. Minty Root's sound design, for example, or Vinson Vision using a convoluted animation pipeline that would have honestly crippled the project, which was like...
I want to get into that here in a minute.
Oh gosh. And, you know, and it's funny, very controversial figure, Animated James, was the one who said that a long time ago. That this man really loves to kiss people's butts because we're very kind and very generous, but please tell me if I'm doing something wrong. Don't sit there and dump on me, but tell me I'm doing something wrong, because then I'll fix it and not cringe at my past self.
Yes. Like I said, once your project is out, it's out. Sure, you can do things like remasters or remakes, but the original will always be there. It is you'll have a much better time having those honest critiques. And I don't think most of you know how convoluted my original pipeline was. If any of you saw the Finlight 2020 trailer that I premiered at HarmonyCon 2020, I probably used like 3 different programs to animate. The backgrounds were rendered in Unreal, and then the characters were animated in Source Filmmaker, and then they were green screened. And to match the lighting, I had to mock that lighting in Source using limited tools. I had to import a blockout version of these sets into Source so I could line up the shots. So not only did I have to somehow match the cameras, but I also had to match the lights. And why would I continue to do that when I could just take the one hard step of transitioning into Blender?
Yes.
And it took me a while to be convinced for many different reasons, but at the end of the day, it would have been easier if everything was in the same program. Everything would have been much more streamlined and wouldn't have been much of a motivation killer because I was just having extra steps with that pipeline.
Yeah, and I was the one that convinced him to do that.
Well, it was him, it was Mario Trial, there was different people, but yes, it was him too.
If I just wanted to be nice and be like, oh yeah, that's cool, man, you know, good job, good for you. You know, the project would have failed pretty hard, and I didn't want to see that happen. I don't want to see projects fail. And I don't want to see your projects fail. And think about that when you see someone's project that's kind of you know, think about, okay, what would I want someone to do if I were in their position and I didn't know that this was going to be a big issue, right? You really gonna not warn someone that they're gonna be hit by a car?
Yeah, and to that point, there is a difference between constructive criticism and being mean to people.
Yes.
Solid constructive feedback should be given in a respectful and caring way. You don't want to give people the wrong context, or else they will not listen to you. So there is a right way to give constructive criticism, especially if you try to explain, well, here's why I think why, or you explain it.
And there's also the reverse of that, being open to other people's feedback, being critical of your own work, not too critical. You don't want to be a downer on yourself. You should take pride in what you create, but you should also take a critical look at it. And if there are things that you see that need fixed, then maybe work on those. Or if someone else gives you some feedback, take a really honest look at that and an honest look at your own work.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you have failed in some way or you're a bad person or that there's something wrong with you. Don't associate your own skill with your own personal worth. And I bring that up because a lot of people do that. I do it too. Your ability to do something is not connected to your inherent value as a human being. So don't be afraid to accept criticism, because it doesn't mean that you're wrong or that there's something wrong with you. It just means that there are places you can genuinely improve, and it's going to make you better.
And it takes years to develop a lot of those necessary skills.
It's also important the other way around, not to be just a people pleaser, because sometimes you're going to get some criticism from people, and they might be wrong. They might give you advices that you will just reject because it turns out it just doesn't match, and the person just tried to inject their own ideas that they wanted to see. And I've had that where I had to pick my fights. For example, with Luna's Determination, I had someone who was trying to keep me from putting any white shot. Just wanted close up to the characters because he wanted to see the characters, and thinking, no, I need to show the fact that she's lonely, like see that there's
shots.
Nobody. And sometimes you're gonna have to pick your fight and argue, but argue in good faith, not just try to point fingers at saying the person is bad.
Yeah, and I know that personally because there are several people that come into the Dimensional Shift Discord server and they want to recommend a feature or a change or something, and I'm like, well, we'll consider that, thank you very much. And then I don't consider it because I knew exactly right then I was not about to do that because it would ruin the entire game.
Another suggestion I would say, like, even if you're stuck in creatively when it comes to writing, a lot of writers end up by failure if they're too ambitious with what they can do in their craft, especially if it's too artsy or too I hate to say the word pretentious, as most people say. The best way to start your career, even as a storyteller in most projects, is a great suggestion that many say is write what you know. Write what you are very familiar with. It can be your life experiences, your childhood, your places you went to, or the things that you love.
Yes.
That's how you steal like a true artist.
Basically, what AG is saying is that we are limited, mortal human beings. We do not have all the skills in the world, and we are not as skilled as we think we are. I mean, we all know that when we go and try and draw a hand and it never works. So, or a hoof.
And
those could be just as hard.
And there's also another thing that I'd like people to not forget. Don't be afraid to be cheesy from time to time. Star Trek is extremely cheesy in the original.
And we love it because of that.
There's an episode of Voyager where mac and cheese causes the ship's biofunction to malfunction.
Yes,
It's fine. Don't try to be too serious. Don't try to be like Snyder with just pretentious slow-mo shots in black and white that really wants you to take
And
it
cute brown color
seriously.
scheme everywhere.
Yeah,
Like-
so just kind of moving along because we've got 15 minutes left, and I guess we don't have much of a Q&A here, but we can have a Q&A. Oh, well, we can have a Q&A, but you know, how do we finish a project? It's a good question. I never asked. But how do we finish a project? Well, you finish it by just chugging along. You ever heard that little story about the little engine that could?
The little engine that could.
Yes, little engine that could. You just keep going at your own pace. Don't let other people push you. Good reason to not put out trailers is so that you don't have other people pushing you or yourself pushing you.
Or don't give release dates because that's
Yes.
impossible to calculate.
Don't give
especially
release dates.
when it's a hobby and you have a full-time job to worry about.
Yes. Also, just on that note real quick, most people don't actually have the expectations that you're setting on yourself. They're really not expecting much of anything. Just do what you like, and if you do what you like and put your heart into it, they'll see that. Obviously, make it good, but they'll see that you really did your best. So.
Yeah, speaking again on scope and the ambition of a project, going back to my Fallout Equestria project, it's how a lot of past Fallout Equestria projects failed, is just the scope of the story, how daunting it can seem to create such a large project, and maybe you've planned out a whole project and now you're thinking, oh crap, like this is going to take a really long time and a lot of effort to create. It can seem really daunting. And so what I tell my team is, don't worry about all the stuff that comes later that you want to start thinking about, but then you get overwhelmed by all those thoughts. Think about what we can do right now, taking one step at a time, focusing on the things right in front of us, getting those done, and then moving on to the next part, you know? How to finish this off, sort of hedge your vision. You don't want to have, like, I don't want to say you have like tunnel vision, but honestly you kind of have to, so that you don't get overwhelmed by your own scope.
Focus in the short term instead of being paralyzed by the long term.
Exactly, a short term rather than long term.
Focus on the short term rather than being paralyzed by the long term. That's a good way to say it.
That's where I am. So I live that a lot. I'm like, oh,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's also perfectly fine to just do short projects. There's a lot of very short projects that still resonate with the fandom. So just you don't need to make a full fan episode on your own. Nobody really requires that.
Yeah, and you also don't need to do your big project now. You know, you don't have to do that now. In fact, honestly, it's best if you do that way later, once you've already done a bunch of small projects, so that you have experience that you didn't know you would have. I'm sure all of us have some type of OC story that we want to make and something like that, but none of us want to make it because we want to do it right. And so we allow all the other ones to be failures except that one.
I've been trying to make an album of music just about that for like the past 2 years. It's so slow.
Well, it's all right for it to be slow.
Yeah.
On scope 2, just for a personal example, the dimensional shift has seen scope creep, but we have cut back, like, oh my gosh. A good friend of mine was like, hey, can we make it open world? No, we're never gonna make it open world. But you know,
Yep, I've had to cut scopes too. The Fleeting Light initially was going to be, what is it? I don't know if it's 15 episodes. Then it got cut to 10, and now it's cut to 5, and now it's focusing on one character because it's like, with a limited budget, and we all do it in our free time. That was too high of a standard for me. It would have been much easier of like, hey, if we want to explore our other original characters, we can do that down the line. but I want to get at least one character right. And the best way to do that is just to have one primary focus and have it more streamlined, because I thought people would have a much better time connecting with it that way.
And you know what, even on scope, that's what pre-production is for, is to help you experiment with the scope. You know, make a vertical slice. See, can I really do this entire thing? Can I? No? Let's scale that back a little bit. It's so much easier to do that in the pre-production phase when it's this kind of safe area than to do it in the production phase when you've got so much going on and everything is dependent on everything else. And if you change the one thing, it's going to ruin everything, you know? So really, if you want to finish a project, just like if you want to finish building a skyscraper, you make sure you planned it good. You don't just start stacking bricks on top of each other. So,
and it's also important, for example, with pre-production, all the animatics I showed, they look like garbage for a reason. They were made to be disposable. And that's fine. I cut a whole minute of animatic just because I realized it killed the pacing. There was that scene where you had Twilight arriving while Starlight was about to start the holographic tree, and it was about a minute of just her just saying, "I don't want to talk about it," and just saying, "Oh, okay, you're here because of the tree," and they had a whole discussion about it. Realized it's redundant, it's pointless, it kills the pace, it's boring. And I just cut it. Like, she just arrives when she starts, and it worked. So, and I didn't have to animate that whole minute of character acting. I didn't have to record the VAs recording those lines. I didn't have to waste a lot of resources for something boring, which is really important. So,
well, I believe that's really it. Unless you have any more comments.
Q&A.
Q&A.
Let's do a Q&A.
All right, so first, actually, one slight thing about writing, and then I'll add a slightly more complex to it. So I worked as an editor on about 20 novel-like things have been published. And one piece of advice, especially for writers, is it's very important for writers to distinguish between what they know as the writer, i.e. God, what the character knows, and what the audience knows. Because these are three non-interfering scopes that are very easily confused. So to give you an example, in one story that was part of this mega project, Luna is talking about a problem, and she literally says something like, "I will put a final solution to this problem." And I wrote, she sounds like she's talking about genocide.
Yeah, she sounds like Hitler.
And in this story, Luna is the leader of the heroes, okay? Like, the heroes of the story work for Luna. So I wrote, she sounds like she's talking about genocide. And everyone in the team yelled at me about how Luna was a good pony. And I'm like, yes, Luna is the leader of the heroes. That's why she shouldn't say things like that. Because if you're a reader and you don't know that Luna is the leader of the heroes, and you read that, that's not what you're going to come across. And they never got it, because they were so focused on knowing already in their head what Luna's actual motivation was, they could not distance themselves and see how it would read to a brand new reader.
Yes, and actually on that is where, especially for games, but also any creative art, playtesting, showing it to other people is very important. They're not gonna sit there and steal your ideas unless you just have really shady friends. Don't have shady friends, okay? But they're not gonna sit there and steal your ideas. Don't worry about that. Let them see and get their feedback. Last night, like 2 a.m., I was out there with my laptop. I brought the alpha version of Dimensional Shift, if y'all want to go play it later today, for people to play. And it was an eye-opener, because I'm so used to, using the sword mechanic and all that and knowing how to play it, that I didn't realize just how much the audience doesn't know how to play it. They don't know what's going on. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're designing that game, and the same thing for any other artistic production, where you actually have a lot more control over that in other artistic fields other than a game, because you can show them. Whereas if you show them in the game, you're forcing them to look at it, and that's boring. Or if it's a cutscene, that is. So do show it to other people, and don't explain it to them. Just get their reactions and say, okay, what do you think about this?
Yeah, because if you as the writer have to explain what you were trying to get at with your work, then I'm sorry, but you kind of failed to communicate that to the reader, and you need to rethink how you're communicating that.
I was going to say, there's also the thing in story that I have learned plenty over the course of 6 years. show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell. Yeah.
That is a sin that a lot of people keep forgetting. Like us, Minty said that a little while ago. It's the opposite of all that. It's telling than showing. It's opposite.
It's especially if you're working with animations, it's a visual medium. Cinema is a language, and you should learn how to speak it because you can communicate a lot without ever saying a word of dialogue.
Yeah, and also the show don't tell thing, and this is for writing too. Respect your audience. They're intelligent. They're not stupid. At least, well, I am, but you're not, okay? And I am pretty sure that you could read between the lines and figure stuff out. That doesn't mean go super vague, like I know some friends do, but allow people to figure things out for themselves, because that's fun when they have like a whoa moment and they put two and two together before the character does, and it's satisfying to see, oh, then the character finally puts it together. Yes.
And don't be afraid to not play safe. Most creative artists, the most successful ones, never play safe. Do not let people pull you down and cut corners.
Take risks.
For their favors. No. Go have fun with what you make. Like Tarantino said and Francis Ford Coppola said.
So, any other questions?
Well, actually, my actual question was just about motivation instead of just that appointment, that example. First of all, don't take risks. Haha, where do you find out from my main characters? You won't find out. But that's not my point. Motivation, that's really what I wanted to talk about. So you talked about not putting out trailers. Well, probably because the story that me and this group of people worked on was really a set of about 30 stories. 2 of them exist. They're sitting on fan fiction. You wouldn't know that they're part of a bigger story. So, but in putting those out and seeing that green bar all the way was the most motivation we've ever got. So I don't know if that's a trailer though, because people didn't really know when they read it that they were part of a bigger story.
So about the trailers, my philosophy personally for trailers is I am not going to make a trailer. I don't want to make a trailer that builds expectations that I am not ready to meet, right? For our gameplay thing, I don't want to make a bunch of gameplay early in alpha, polish it up, which is a waste of money, and then put it out there when I know we're going to change everything, right? Or I know, I don't want to say a release date when I don't know what the actual release date is. However, teasers, which I think is different than trailers, teasers that tease the story or the plot or the mood or other stuff like that, I think that's completely fine. We did that for Valiant Studios. We teased Twilight walking through a forest and a portal being ripped open and some mysterious character dropping in. That's completely fine. You don't see that in the game. It's still part of the story, and even if it's not part of the story, we can, retcon it and change that in the game. It doesn't matter. It's a teaser in the sense that it leads them on and it makes them question what's going to happen. It gets them interested, but it doesn't set up expectations you're not ready to deal with.
So, building. Oh, you go ahead. Before I monopolize.
Oh well, I guess. Sure, may I? Okay, so let's say that the group of people in which you create content with, it's kind of like a very large group, and the purpose of that group is to create things together. However, there's not a specific vision. How do you go about, what if your workforce is kind of vague with their talent? How do you make sure you know what people are doing so that you don't waste their time talking?
You also assign specific roles to them because a good oiled machine has many different parts.
Yeah, well, you talk to them and you set boundaries. It's funny what you're saying. That's kind of what happened with our previous panel, actually. We didn't really have much organization at the start, and then I was like, we need to organize this. And I spearheaded everyone to make a PowerPoint and start writing stuff down. But I didn't tell them what to write or anything. But I do think there should be leadership. Personally, on my team, we have a core team of 3 people. We have the lead game designer and programmer who understands the entire game design side. We have the lead writer who understands all the writing. And then you have me, who is just, I do the sound and music and I hold the vision. And I keep track of what everyone is doing. I talk to them. I say, what are you doing now? What do you need to do? All this type of stuff, and I assign tasks. You know, I'm the task delegator. But I do think when you have a lot of people, you do need organization. I don't think you can just do it all at once or do it all together in a mess. And that happens on 4chan. Interestingly, but even then, you see that, like, say for the Pony Voice Preservation Project, there are leaders that emerge, like Flipperon and people like that, who say, okay, we need to do this. You can do this, but here's how to do it. You know.
Yeah. And I did talk about that concept in our last panel, the job of a director. So people on your team, creative people, if you just let them have at it just to create something, maybe you do have like a general framework of what they should be making, but say you just let them create. They're going to all create something, sure, it may be cool, but it's going to lack cohesion. It's going to be mishmash of ideas and tones and contexts that aren't going to work well together. And so that's why it's the job of a director, or maybe a group of directors who all share the vision, to be able to communicate that vision to people, to be able to direct them, to show them what they should create with what tone and what context within whatever you're creating, so that it all works cohesively together.
Yeah, you're making sure they stay inside the lane of your vision, but it's worth noting that they're still doing the driving. You know, they are still creative people, and you need to let them be creative. I think we have time for one more question, because we don't have time. So, anyone?
Well, the last question is, how about casting them? Like, how to cast certain people when it comes to big projects?
Use casting call.
And just keep until you get enough people.
I mean, to be honest, I'm a bit of a weirdo. I didn't cast them. I nabbed them from another project that I was on. So connections are very important too.
Yes, networking is vital.
Networking is very vital. I knew Shadow from Ambient White, and I just nabbed her and Fox off of there as Twilight.
I tend to just ask Shadow, like, do you have any friends? Like, do you know someone who's really good at them?
Yep.
And usually she does. And if she doesn't, well, I go ask another friend. And that's the importance of friendship.
No, that also is one of the other acceptable places for making teasers or publicized content, is to get people to come onto your project. That's fine. All I'm saying for the trailer thing is don't set up expectations